The auction yard smelled of sweat, dust, and despair. A thin haze of heat hovered over the wooden stalls, making the air shimmer and the cries of the gathered crowd bounce against the low, sun-baked walls. She sat on the worn crate, knees trembling, her skirts soaked in blood and sweat, the remnants of her first labor clinging to her like a cruel reminder of the life she had brought into this world. Her baby, swaddled in a ragged piece of cloth, fussed weakly beside her. Tiny hands flailed in the air, seeking warmth, seeking safety, and finding nothing but strangers' eyes in the rough floor beneath. She had been stolen away from her home days ago, sold under false promises that she would find work, that she would have a chance at a new life. But none of that mattered now. Here, in front of the crowd, she was reduced to a commodity, her humanity stripped away in front of dozens of jeering men. Their laughter was cruel, their eyes hungry, and their words like knives cutting deeper than any wound her body carried. "Who'll give me 1000 for the bleeding mother?" the auctioneer called out, slapping the gavel against the wooden post with a force that made her jump. 1000. Step right up, take the girl and claim what's yours. She flinched as men shoved and jostled to get a better view, their excitement vicious, predatory. A few leaned close, their voices dripping with lewd suggestions and boasts of what they would do once she was theirs. Her stomach heaved, but not with nausea, it was rage, fear, and an unspoken promise to survive. She clenched her teeth, forcing herself to breathe through the pain, through the shame, through the endless humiliation. Her child cried again, a high, piercing sound that cut through the raucous crowd. She reached instinctively, trying to soothe him, rocking him gently despite her own trembling. "Shish, shish, my baby," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread against the storm of voices. "I will protect you. I promise I will protect you." The bidding escalated. Voices shouted numbers, knives in the air, hands thrown recklessly into the fray. Some men grabbed her skirts, tugging roughly, testing her strength, testing her submission. She resisted with what little energy her body could muster. Every push and pull sent waves of pain through her still bleeding body. The taste of iron lingered on her tongue, mingling with the dust that coated her lips. She felt small, powerless, like a bird trapped in a cruel cage of men who had no mercy. And then she saw him. He was different. There was no greed in his eyes, no hunger, no cruel anticipation. Just a calm, measured gaze that cut through the chaos, observing her as though he could see the life she had lived, the pain she had endured, and the strength she still carried in the hollow of her spine. He didn't call out, didn't push through the crowd. He simply stepped forward when the bidding reached its cruel peak, his presence commanding without a word. "I'll take her," he said, his voice low and firm. A murmur ran through the crowd. Confusion flickered across their faces. No one expected anyone to step in, not for kindness, not for justice, not for a human soul. They expected greed, cruelty, exploitation, but not this. He ignored their stares and the whispered questions, walking calmly toward her, ignoring the jeers as he reached her side. He extended a gloved hand, and she stared at it, unsure whether to pull away or collapse into it. His other hand gestured to her child, and for the first time in hours, perhaps days, someone offered a soft, careful smile instead of a leer. He didn't touch her without asking. He didn't make her feel less than herself. In that moment, she realized something she hadn't allowed herself to hope for. Someone could see her, truly see her, even now, when she was weakest. With that, the ropes around her wrists were cut, and though she felt a flicker of relief, the fear did not leave entirely. She had been burned before. She had been used before. She had been auctioned, betrayed, and abandoned. But something about the way he moved, the way he held his head high amidst the chaos, told her this man was not like the others. Perhaps he could offer something she had never dared to imagine: safety, respect, even hope. As he helped her to her feet, balancing her weak body and taking the child in one arm, she allowed herself a trembling breath. The crowd's jeers faded behind her as she followed him through the dusty yard. Somewhere, in the far distance, a bird cried. And she clung to the faintest spark of belief that her life, and her child's, might finally take a different path. The ride to the ranch was long and quiet, the only sounds the soft cooing of her baby and the occasional creak of the wagon wheels on the uneven dirt road. She stayed silent, wrapped tightly in her tattered shawl, eyes fixed on the horizon but seeing little of it. Her mind was full of the auction yard, the jeers, the hands that had grabbed her, the smell of sweat and blood that seemed to cling to her skin even now. She shivered, not from cold, but from memory. Her body ached, her spirit trembled, and yet she clung to the child in her arms with a ferocity that shocked even her. This tiny being, so fragile and new, was her tether to the world, her reason to survive. The ranch itself was unlike anything she had ever imagined. Rolling fields stretched beneath a sky so wide it made her chest ache, dotted with grazing horses and the occasional cow wandering lazily. A wooden fence ran along the edge of the property, weathered but strong, enclosing a small haven that smelled of hay, earth, and a faint, comforting warmth of home. The house was modest, sturdy, built of warm wood, and from it came the soft laughter of children. At first, she recoiled from every act of kindness. When he offered her a bowl of warm soup, she hesitated, unsure whether it was a trap or a test. When he brought a clean blanket for her and the baby, she flinched. Every gesture, every gentle word, felt too good, too unnatural. She had known nothing but cruelty, yet this man, this stranger, seemed intent only on making her safe. It was confusing and terrifying all at once. "You don't have to speak," he said gently when he noticed her hesitation. "Just rest. Both of you." She wanted to argue, to refuse, to run, but her body betrayed her. She sank onto a chair, holding her baby close. The child's tiny fingers curled around hers, a lifeline she couldn't deny. And for the first time since the auction, she allowed herself a moment of relief, a moment where the weight of fear lifted, just slightly, from her shoulders. Days passed. She began to learn the rhythms of the ranch, the animals that needed care, the chores that could be done slowly and without pressure, and the quiet, steady work that gave her a sense of accomplishment. She discovered that her small contributions mattered. The horses nickered softly when she approached, the cows allowed her near the barns, and even the chickens seemed to recognize her gentle presence. It was a world that operated on respect, not fear. He never pressed her, never demanded her trust or gratitude. He simply existed alongside her, a steady presence in the chaos she had always known. When he spoke, it was not to command but to guide. "You're doing fine," he said one morning as she tended to the baby while the sun climbed over the hills. "Take your time, there's no rush here." Slowly, cautiously, she began to trust him. She realized he wasn't like the men at the auction who had seen her as a thing to own. He saw her as a person, someone with strength and scars and a future worth protecting. And in that realization, a small seed of hope began to grow, fragile and trembling but alive. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the distant mountains, painting the fields in gold and amber, he approached her while she rocked her child on the porch. "You don't have to stay if you don't want to," he said softly. "But I want to offer you something. A choice. A home. A life where you're not just surviving." Her hands tightened around the baby. I don't know if I can trust anyone anymore," she whispered, the words thick with pain and fear. "I understand," he said without judgment. "I won't force you. I only ask that you consider this. Here, you can rest. You can heal. Your child will be safe. And no one will ever treat you like that again." Tears sprang to her eyes unbidden, and she brushed them away angrily, embarrassed by the weakness they betrayed. But even as she struggled, she felt a tiny, stubborn ember of relief. For the first time in her life, someone was offering her more than survival, someone was offering her dignity, safety, and the rarest gift of all, choice. That night, as she lay in a simple bed, her baby curled against her chest, she allowed herself to imagine a future she had never dared to picture. She imagined laughter that wasn't tinged with fear, days filled with sun rather than pain, a life where she and her child were more than just shadows moving through cruelty. She imagined a place where she could belong. And for the first time, she began to believe that such a place might exist, here, on this quiet, sprawling ranch, under the watchful eyes of the man who had saved her not to own her, but to protect her. Weeks turned into months, and with each passing day, the woman discovered a rhythm in the life of the ranch. The chores that once seemed daunting became a source of quiet pride. She learned to milk the cows, tend the gardens, and feed the chickens. She even began riding the horses, her initial fear slowly replaced by a sense of freedom that made her chest ache with longing. But the most important lesson she learned was the rhythm of trust, the slow, cautious acceptance that not all hands reached for harm. Her child grew stronger too, fattened by her careful nursing and the warm, unhurried life of the ranch. The baby's cries were now replaced by coos and gurgles, laughter that rang out like tiny bells across the fields. She marveled at each new milestone, every tooth, every grasping hand, every first attempt to crawl. In those moments, the horrors of the auction yard seemed distant, as if they belonged to another life entirely. And yet, she knew the past would never fully leave her. It lingered in the ache of her body, in the quick flinch when a sudden movement startled her, in the caution with which she approached every new situation. The rancher never forced her to talk about it. He never pressed her to share her story or reveal the scars of her past. Instead, he gave her patience, and that patience became a bridge between their worlds. He would hand her tools, offer advice, or simply sit in silence on the porch while she rocked the baby, letting her presence be enough. Sometimes, he would share stories of the ranch, how he had grown up in these fields, how his parents had taught him the value of hard work and respect for all living things. These stories, simple as they were, became the threads of connection, weaving a fragile but growing bond between them. One morning, as the sun rose in a blaze of orange and pink, painting the fields in golden light, she walked through the orchard with her child cradled against her chest. The air smelled of earth and blossoms, and she felt a peace she had never known. She paused under a sprawling apple tree and watched as the rancher tended to the horses in the distance. There was no expectation, no demand, just quiet, steady presence. And she realized, with a start, that she no longer felt the constant, gnawing fear that had shadowed her life for so long. He came to stand beside her, not touching, just walking silently. "You've done well," he said softly, his voice warm, carrying no judgment, only acknowledgement. "Both of you. You've endured more than most could imagine." She looked down at the baby, whose tiny hand curled around hers, and then back at him. For the first time, she didn't see the man who had merely bought her freedom. She saw the man who had given her something immeasurable, the chance to live again. She saw the man who had given her the courage to hope, the strength to heal, and the space to become herself again. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, she began to accept that this was no longer just a temporary refuge. She started helping around the house, organizing meals, tending the garden, and even laughing again, a soft, hesitant laugh that surprised her with its warmth. The children of the ranch began to include her in their games, their laughter and chatter no longer alien but welcoming. For the first time in her life, she experienced belonging. One evening, as the sky blushed with the dying light of the day, she found herself sitting on the porch with him, the baby asleep in her arms. The silence between them was comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. "I never imagined a life like this," she admitted quietly, her voice trembling. "After everything, I didn't think I could ever feel safe, or happy." He looked at her, his expression unreadable but gentle. "Life doesn't always give second chances," he said softly, "but sometimes, it offers the ones we need the most. You've earned every bit of this, just by surviving. Now, you can choose to thrive." And in that moment, she realized she had already begun to thrive. Her scars were still there, etched in her body and memory, but they no longer defined her. She was no longer a woman who had been auctioned, bruised, and abandoned. She was a mother, a survivor, and a part of something larger, a family, a home, a life worth living. She finally looked at him, really looked, and saw the depth of care in his eyes. Not pity, not ownership, but respect, understanding, and a quiet devotion that mirrored her own growing attachment. Her lips curved into a small smile, and she felt a warmth bloom in her chest that had nothing to do with the sun. She whispered softly to herself, and perhaps to him, "I belong here." And for the first time in her life, she believed it. The ranch, the wide fields, the steady hands that had guided her through the darkest moments, these were no longer just elements of a place. They were her life, her home, her hope, and in that hope, she discovered something even greater than survival, the possibility of love, of family, and of a future she had never dared to imagine.